A white billionaire watches as his disabled son dances step by step with a black waitress at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago. None of them could have imagined that this moment would completely change their lives forever. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. It was a Thursday evening, and Le Mans Bleu was exactly as it had always promised to be, unapologetically elegant and proudly exclusive. Tucked into a glass and gold tower overlooking downtown Chicago, the restaurant catered to a clientele who preferred their wine rare and their company even rarer. Every polished fork gleamed under low chandelier light. Every plate looked like it had been styled for a magazine cover. Every whisper was intentional, meant only for select ears. And somewhere among the murmurs of aged Scotch and Wagyu beef, Aisha Blake moved silently like a shadow in uniform. She wore a fitted charcoal apron over a crisp white blouse. Her braids were tied back neatly, her posture perfect, her tray steady. She'd memorized the names of the regulars, the preferred wine pairings, even which ones expected eye contact and which considered it presumptuous. She wasn't here to shine. She was here to disappear. Aisha was 30, and she looked younger than that, but she carried herself like someone who had seen too much and learned to carry the weight quietly. Her skin was smooth, her jawline sharp, her eyes quick. But it wasn't beauty that defined her. It was control, the kind born from survival. She was the only black waitress on the evening staff. In fact, she had been the only black waitress for the past 3 years, and everyone, including management, preferred to keep it that way. One felt progressive without being uncomfortable. That night, Aisha was assigned to table 5, a booth always reserved, always shielded by the angled partition of designer glass. Behind it sat Mr. Charles Dunhill, a man with a face as familiar as his real estate empire's skyline. Gray temples, impeccable suit, smile that never quite reached his eyes. She approached with the grace of someone who knew the margin for error didn't exist. She had double-checked every item on the tray. Seared scallops with citrus glaze, truffle risotto, 2 glasses of vintage Chardonnay. "Good evening, sir," she said, voice calm and clear. "Your entrees." She lowered the tray carefully. That's when it happened. With a sudden jerk, Charles Dunhill slapped the plate of scallops from her hand. The porcelain crashed to the floor. White sauce and golden glaze splattered across her apron and onto the Italian carpet. The restaurant fell quiet, not entirely, but enough for her to hear her own breath catch. "I don't want her touching my food," he said, his voice flat but loud enough for 2 surrounding tables to look up. "Didn't they teach you cleanliness wherever you're from?" Aisha stood motionless. The room didn't go silent. It tightened. Eyes flicked toward them, then away. A few mouths twitched, unsure whether to smirk or feign discomfort. "I asked for a different server," Dunhill added with a smirk. "But maybe your manager doesn't understand the concept of customer comfort." The words hung in the air like the smell of something burning. Aisha's hand curled slightly at her side. Her jaw clenched. She didn't reply. She didn't look away either. Her eyes locked onto his, but not with confrontation, with something colder, contained, as if she had been here before in 1,000 different versions. It was only seconds, but they felt like minutes. Then the voice came. Blake. Aisha turned. Mr. Renner, the floor manager, was already striding toward her white 40s, overdressed for someone not paying for dinner. He didn't glance at the mess on the floor, didn't ask what had happened. "What did I tell you about presentation?" he hissed. "This is Le Mans Bleu, not some diner in the South Side." His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, and it pierced every table within 10 feet. "She dropped the plate on me," Dunhill added, smiling as he dabbed a napkin against the cuff of his suit like it had been touched by filth. "I don't expect to see her again." Renner snapped at her. "Clock out after this. You're done for the night. And don't make a scene. We've already had enough of those." Aisha's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She didn't move. Her breath had slowed, but her eyes burned not with tears, but something harder. She looked down at the tablecloth where a few droplets of sauce had landed, small splashes of orange and cream on white linen. It reminded her of a painting, something abstract, something ruined. She inhaled slowly. "Understood," she said, and just like that she stepped back. The staff pretended not to watch. The guests returned to their chatter, but something had shifted. Aisha walked to the back hallway near the kitchen doors, where the buzz of plated desserts and sautéed shallots couldn't drown out the echo of her own thoughts. She leaned against the wall. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't hurt, but because it was no longer surprising. The worst part of racism in places like Le Mont Bleu wasn't the slurs. It was the civility of it. The way it wore expensive cologne and came with gold cufflinks. It looked you in the eye while erasing you completely. It sounded like comfort and expectations. It dressed itself as standards. Aisha had learned long ago not to respond. Not because she agreed, but because dignity sometimes meant walking away before someone had the power to strip it from you. She took off her stained apron and held it folded in both hands. Her fingers were steady, but her pulse hammered in her ears. She closed her eyes just for a second, thought about the bills due next week, her sister's upcoming medical appointment, the community center dance class she had to teach on Saturday. Then she opened her eyes and straightened her shoulders. Some people worked in places like Le Mont Bleu to feel important. Aisha worked there so she could survive long enough to build something more important than any of these people would ever understand. She walked back toward the main floor with quiet determination just to finish what was left of her shift with whatever shred of professionalism she still owed. But fate, it turned out, had other plans for that night. Something no one in that room could have predicted was about to happen. Something that would take a single small gesture, a child's hand reaching upward, and turn it into a storm that would shake the walls of power, privilege, and silence. But that part hadn't arrived yet. Not just yet. The clinking of silverware had just begun to fade back into polite conversation. Aisha had returned to the service station, her stained apron folded neatly under one arm, her composure reconstructed like armor. She was set on finishing the night without another scene. She kept her focus tight on wine levels, empty plates, folded napkins. But then the music started, a soft, slow piece on the grand piano near the bar. A live pianist in a black tuxedo leaned into the keys, drawing out gentle notes that filled the room like breath. Aisha didn't look up at first. She was refilling a glass of sparkling water at table 7 when she felt the shift. It was something in the silence, a kind of quiet that didn't belong in a place like Le Mont Bleu, the kind that pulled people's heads up, paused forks in midair, and made a room of confident people suddenly unsure of where to look. She followed their eyes, and there he was. Ethan Carrington. He sat in a custom-made wheelchair at table 1 near the windows. He was small, maybe 9 years old, with neatly combed blonde hair and a tiny navy blazer that hung too loose on his frame. His legs were thin and braced in rigid metal, but his right hand was reaching forward, toward her. The boy didn't speak. His hand simply hovered in the air, shaking just slightly. His cheeks were flushed pink. His eyes, wide, nervous, searching, locked on Aisha's across the room. Time slowed. Aisha blinked, unsure at first if he was pointing at something, but he wasn't pointing. He was asking for a dance. There was no misreading it. Aisha felt her heart flutter once, then settle into a tight, slow beat. Her hands were still at her sides. She hadn't moved. She hadn't even breathed. The sharp voice cut the tension. Mr. Renner, again. He was already moving toward her, his dress shoes clapping against the tiled floor. His face twisted with incredulity. "This isn't a dance hall," he snapped, gesturing toward Ethan like he was some unruly child disrupting a board meeting. "Our staff are not here to entertain." Then a deeper voice joined in, calm but firm. "Ethan, sit down." Jonathan Carrington, father of the boy, hadn't risen yet, but his voice had the kind of weight that always got a reaction. He sounded more embarrassed than angry, like someone watching a protocol slip in public and wanting to cover it fast. Aisha remained frozen. Every pair of eyes was now on her. Not on the boy, not on the father, on her, the only black woman in the room. Her body tensed. She could feel heat rising along her neck into her ears. Her throat tightened. She looked at Ethan. The boy's hand dropped slightly, still extended, but no longer steady. His chin trembled. He didn't understand why he was being told no. His eyes watered, but he didn't cry. He swallowed it like he had learned to do before. His mouth opened just a little. "I just wanted to dance," he said softly. Aisha heard it as if he had whispered it into her own chest. It wasn't loud, but it cracked through the silence with more power than any order from his father. Jonathan Carrington stood now. His face was taut, his jaw clenched. He didn't look at Aisha. He looked at his son. "Not now," he said. "This isn't the time." Ethan didn't move. He looked from his father to Aisha, then back again. And in that look was the kind of raw confusion only a child could hold. The kind that asked, why does kindness make everyone so uncomfortable? The silence in the restaurant remained. Aisha didn't move right away. She knew what everyone was thinking. What does she do now? Does she ignore him? Does she comply? Does she pretend it didn't happen and walk away like they all expect her to? The silence in Le Mont Bleu stretched long and uncomfortable. It wasn't the elegant, curated kind of quiet the restaurant prided itself on. This was a different kind, raw, disoriented, charged with questions no one wanted to answer out loud. The boy's hand was still extended. Ethan's arm had begun to tremble from the effort of holding it up. His small fingers were spread hopeful. The expression on his face hadn't changed, wide-eyed, gentle, unaware of how much tension his simple gesture had triggered. Everyone waited for Aisha to retreat, to smile politely, to diffuse the moment and return to invisibility. But she didn't. Instead, she looked around. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She simply scanned the room, table by table, face by face. People avoided her gaze. Others stared, unsure whether to be embarrassed or entertained. A man near the fireplace shook his head slowly. A woman at the bar whispered to her friend, who chuckled into her wine glass. Aisha stood straight. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. "I can't dance while still wearing the uniform." She untied her apron with measured hands and folded it once over her forearm. A ripple went through the room. Her words weren't rebellious. They weren't theatrical. But they drew a line, a quiet one, sharp, clean. One that said, "I may serve you, but I do not belong to you." She stepped away from her station and walked to Ethan. The little boy blinked, then smiled, uncertain. He reached for the controls on his chair and slowly pressed the button that lifted the footrests. His legs, supported by metal braces, hovered awkwardly above the floor. He put both hands on the armrests, bracing himself. Aisha said nothing. She didn't kneel beside him. She didn't extend her arms to catch him. She simply stood still and waited, giving him the space to make his choice. Ethan grunted softly, struggling to pull himself up. His face tensed. One leg trembled violently. He made it halfway up before wobbling and catching himself on the side of the chair. Aisha didn't move. Instead, she took one small step backward, giving him room. Not too much, just enough to say, "You've got this. I'm not taking this moment from you." With visible effort, Ethan stood, wobbly, crooked, but upright. The piano player seated near the entrance hesitated only a beat before starting again. The same soft tune from before, slow, simple, familiar. Aisha met Ethan's eyes. "You ready?" she asked. He nodded. They took their first step. It wasn't graceful. Ethan's feet shuffled, one leg dragged. The metal brace on his left side made a soft, screeching sound against the floor. His body swayed and his face twisted with focus. Aisha didn't correct him. She didn't guide him. She moved in sync with his rhythm, one slow step at a time. The room watched. Some held their breath. Others pretended to sip drinks they'd forgotten about. One waiter stood frozen near the kitchen door, holding a tray with creme brulee and shaking hands. From the far end of the restaurant, a voice whispered just loud enough to be heard, "She's going to lose her job." Another voice replied quieter, but with something like awe. "Yeah, but she looks better than any of us right now." They reached the center of the floor, 3 steps. That's all it took. 3 slow, deliberate steps. And in that brief space of movement, something changed. Not in the room, in the people. Jonathan Carrington sat still at his table. His face was unreadable, but his eyes followed every movement. His jaw clenched, but his hand resting on the tablecloth twitched slightly, an unconscious flinch. He saw something, a memory. His wife gone now, almost 2 years, dancing with Ethan in the living room. Her words echoing in his head. "It's not about perfect steps, John. It's about connection." And in that moment, as his son moved awkwardly but proudly across the room, beside a woman he had only just met, Jonathan Carrington began to understand something. The lesson wasn't in the dance. It was in who chose to follow and who dared to lead. Aisha kept her gaze on Ethan. Her expression was calm but resolute. Each step she took was calculated not to steal the moment, but to honor it. They completed a slow turn. Ethan stumbled once, but Aisha matched his pace. Not once did she reach out to balance him. When they came to a stop, Ethan was breathless, but beaming. Aisha knelt slightly, not to his level, but just enough to return her eye contact to his. "Thank you for the dance," she said. Then gently she helped him back into his seat. No flourish, no drama, just grace. As she stood, a man in a gray suit near the fireplace clapped once. Just once. It was enough. Others followed, not loud, not prolonged. A few uncertain claps here and there, quickly fading back into silence. Aisha turned toward her station. She didn't look for approval. She didn't smile. But her eyes locked on Mr. Renner, who stood pale and stiff beside the maitre d's stand. He opened his mouth to speak. Jonathan raised one hand again. "Don't," he said quietly. Mr. Renner froze. Aisha walked past them both and retrieved her apron. She didn't tie it back on. She just folded it again and placed it on the service counter. Then she stood tall, her posture relaxed but firm. No one knew what to say, so no one said anything. And that was the clearest answer of all, because what had just happened didn't need explanation. It needed remembering. One woman, one boy, 3 steps, and 1,000 stairs rearranged. Because when you choose what's right over what's safe, the world stops watching to judge. It starts watching to learn. That night, many would forget what they ordered, or who spilled the wine, or which dessert ran out too early. But no one would forget the woman who said, "I can't dance," while wearing the uniform, and then proved that she didn't need it to matter. The moment had passed, but its weight still lingered in the air. The hush that had swept over Le Mans Bleu hadn't fully lifted. Even as the piano quieted and the forks slowly returned to their places, something felt suspended, changed. Aisha stood beside Ethan's wheelchair, her posture calm, her hands loosely folded in front of her. She looked down at him, not as a server addressing a customer, but as a person addressing another person who had just done something brave. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice soft but full, "for inviting me to dance." Ethan smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was pure. He gave a small nod, his cheeks still pink from the effort. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, but his eyes sparkled with a kind of quiet pride. Aisha gently touched his shoulder, a brief respectful gesture, then straightened up. She turned to leave. Her folded apron still rested at the edge of the service counter. She didn't pick it up. Not yet. She wasn't sure she wanted to. She had no plan, no job lined up, and no idea what would happen when she walked out that door, but she knew one thing for sure. She had chosen herself. She had chosen to be more than a title, more than an apron. She had chosen to be a woman with boundaries. Then a voice stopped her mid-step. Wait. It wasn't sharp like Renner's. It wasn't cold like Dunhill's. It was low, hesitant. A voice used to commanding attention, now sounding uncertain. She turned. Jonathan Carrington had stood up from his seat. He was no longer scanning the room for damage control. He was looking straight at her. His hand reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. "What's your full name?" he asked. Aisha blinked once, steadying her breath. She met his gaze evenly. "Aisha Blake," she answered. Jonathan repeated the name slowly, almost like he was memorizing it. Then he pulled a sleek business card from his wallet and stepped forward. He extended it toward her. "My office," he said. "Tomorrow morning, 10. His voice wasn't commanding. It was quieter than before, but there was no mistaking the gravity behind the gesture. Aisha didn't move immediately. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath again. Every server, every diner, every bartender, all of them watched, unsure of what was happening, but knowing they were witnessing something that wasn't part of the usual script. She stepped forward and took the card. Her fingers brushed his just briefly. The cardstock was thick, embossed, the lettering clean and bold, Carrington Properties. Her thumb slid over the texture as she looked down at it. Her hand trembled just slightly, not from fear, not even from nerves, from recognition. This moment wasn't an offer, it was a shift, a pivot in the dynamic she had known all her life, a place where someone like her was not expected to stand, and someone like him was not expected to reach across. And yet, here they were. 10 o'clock, she repeated. Jonathan gave a single nod. She didn't say thank you. She didn't ask what it was about. She simply folded the card in her palm and turned. As she walked back toward the kitchen, murmurs followed her. They weren't cruel this time, just curious, confused, slightly stunned. A man at table 4 leaned over to his wife. "Who is she?" His wife didn't respond. She just kept watching. Another couple whispered, "She's going to change something. I don't know what, but something." At the service station, Renner stood rigid, his face flushed, mouth tight. Aisha didn't look at him. She picked up her apron, folded it for the last time, and placed it gently in the storage bin behind the counter. She took a slow breath, steadying the pounding in her chest. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline that comes when something big is shifting, and you can feel it, even if you don't yet see it. She turned toward the back hallway, where the exit sign glowed faint red against the polished wall. She passed the same tables she had served dozens of times. This time she didn't look down. She didn't make herself small. She didn't rush. Each step was firm, measured, hers. As she neared the coat room, a voice from one of the smaller booths called out not loudly, but clearly. She might have lost a job tonight, the man said, half speaking, half musing. But she walked out of here with more dignity than anyone in this room walked in with. His companion didn't answer, but someone nearby nodded. In a place where image meant everything, a woman who refused to be reduced had just raised the bar higher than anyone expected, because her value had nothing to do with a title. Not waitress, not employee, not even guest. Her value had always been rooted in one thing: how she carried herself when no one expected her to stand. And tonight, she had stood taller than the room deserved. In a world that constantly tries to define you by your role, your race, or your silence, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is remind them you are more than what they see. Not by yelling, not by begging, but by saying nothing at all, just by walking out with your head high and your name said clearly. Aisha Blake. She wasn't done. She was just getting started. The next morning, the elevator doors opened to the 38th floor of Carrington Tower with a gentle ding. Aisha Blake stepped out, shoulders straight, hands lightly clutching a worn black purse in front of her. The lobby floor sparkled under her shoes, white marble so polished she could see the faint reflection of her navy skirt and off-white blouse. This was the kind of place where silence was engineered, where the air smelled like money and restraint. People moved with purpose, their badges clipped to designer suits, their glances sharp and brief. Aisha kept walking. She'd never been on a floor like this before, not as a guest. She'd delivered food here once years ago during a side job. Back then, no one had spoken to her. They took the tray, signed the receipt, and shut the door. Now she was walking through the same corridor, but this time someone was expecting her. She stopped at the reception desk. The woman seated there looked up, then looked Aisha over quickly, eyes flicking from her shoes to the corners of her pressed blouse to the way she stood. Aisha Blake to see Mr. Carrington. Aisha said, voice firm. The receptionist didn't smile. One moment, she made a call without looking away, voice brisk. She's here. A pause. Right away. She hung up. Miss Whitaker will take you in. Aisha hadn't been waiting long in the lobby when a side door slid open with a mechanical click. A woman appeared. She was tall, white, dressed in a slim gray pantsuit with pearl earrings and a steel expression that suggested she hadn't smiled out of sincerity in years. Her heels struck the floor like punctuation, her hair was pulled into a precise twist, and she didn't offer a greeting, just a nod. I'm Miss Whitaker. Follow me, she said briskly. Aisha rose without a word and walked behind her. As they moved down the corridor past polished glass doors and conference rooms that looked more like art galleries, Aisha could feel Whitaker's energy. Controlled, measured, cold. They turned left toward a private hallway that led to Jonathan Carrington's office. The building's ambient noise faded. The hallway was empty, quiet enough to hear footsteps echo. And that's when it happened. Whitaker didn't slow her pace or look back. She just spoke suddenly, as if she were commenting on the weather. Let me offer you some advice. Aisha glanced at her. Men like Mr. Carrington don't give invitations to people like you unless they're trying to make something disappear or clean up a mess quietly. Aisha said nothing. Whitaker continued, voice low and sharp. I've been with him for over 12 years. I've seen the lawyers, the lobbyists, the personal favors. They all come through here thinking they're special. They never are. Aisha remained silent, walking with even steps. Then Whitaker turned slightly, just enough to shoot a sideways glance. And when someone like you shows up after causing a scene in public, it usually means one of two things. Either he feels guilty, or he wants to make sure you don't become a bigger problem. Aisha finally spoke. I'm not here to be handled. Whitaker gave a short, cold laugh. Of course you're not. But you should know how this works. Women like you don't usually walk out of this building with more than a non-disclosure agreement and maybe a check big enough to buy silence. That was it. No pretense, no subtlety. Just a woman comfortable in her place at the top, reminding another woman where she thought the bottom was. Aisha stopped walking. So did Whitaker. For a brief moment, the silence between them was heavier than anything Carrington could have planned for. Aisha's voice was steady, calm, dead center. Tell me something, she said. Do you talk like this to everyone who doesn't look like you, or just the ones who remind you that you had a head start? Whitaker's eyes narrowed. Her chin lifted slightly. I talk to people who confuse attention with power. Aisha stepped forward, not aggressive, but firm. I don't need attention, and I don't want power the way you think it works. I came because I was invited. You don't have to like that." Whitaker scoffed quietly and turned away. "You should learn your place," Aisha answered without hesitation. "I know exactly where I stand. The question is, do you?" The rest of the walk was quiet, but Whitaker's steps had lost some of their rhythm. Aisha's steady as ever. Carrington's office was enormous, nearly half the floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline. The sun had just begun to crest over the lake, casting a glow across the glass. The furniture was minimalist, leather, steel, sharp lines. On a side table sat a black and white photo of a woman holding a baby, smiling, wind in her hair, probably his late wife. Aisha took a slow breath and remained standing. She had no interest in getting too comfortable. A few minutes later, Jonathan Carrington entered from a side door. He wore a navy suit, crisp and conservative, but his tie was undone, and he looked like he hadn't slept much. "Ms. Blake," he said, "thank you for coming." She nodded. "You asked." He motioned toward a chair, but she stayed standing. He walked to the window facing the city. "This is a little unusual," he said. She raised her eyebrows. "Yes, I don't usually dance with billionaires' children in the middle of service either." That drew a faint smile from him, but it faded quickly. He turned. "I wanted to talk to you because, well, yesterday wasn't just unexpected. It was revealing." Aisha remained quiet. Jonathan walked over to his desk, picked up a folder, and flipped it open. "I had someone pull what we could find on you. Public records, social media, school records." Aisha didn't flinch. He looked up. "New York University Bachelor's in Child Development. You didn't finish your master's." "I dropped out," she said simply. "My sister got sick. I took care of her." He nodded. "You've worked 3 jobs, bookstore on weekends, tutoring during evenings." And he held up a paper. "You co-founded something called Step Free, a dance-based mobility program for kids with physical disabilities, operating out of a community center in South Side." Aisha crossed her arms. 6 years now, she added, every Tuesday and Saturday. Self-funded. Jonathan closed the folder. "Why didn't you mention that last night? You didn't ask." He studied her for a long moment. "You started a whole program, and still took a job waiting tables." "I needed the money. Purpose doesn't pay rent." He exhaled through his nose. "I have a proposal," he said. Aisha stiffened. "I want to offer you a position. As a personal mobility companion to Ethan, you'd be in our home full-time. You'd work directly with our therapists." "No." The word came out clear. Not harsh, not rude, just final. Jonathan blinked. "You haven't even heard the terms. I don't need to." He took a step forward. "I could pay you 5 times what you're making now. You'd have benefits, resources, stability." Aisha didn't move. "You want to buy what happened last night," she said calmly. I'm not accusing you. I'm just telling you it's not for sale." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I'm offering you a real opportunity." She stepped closer, not confrontationally, but deliberately. "No, you're offering control. You're used to people taking your money and saying thank you. I'm not one of those people." He said nothing. "I'm not your project, Mr. Carrington. I'm not here to help you feel better about whatever guilt you've been carrying since the accident. And I'm definitely not going to pretend I work for you because your son smiled for the first time in 2 years." He looked away. "I wasn't trying to diminish you," he said finally. "Then why was the first thing you did research me?" she asked. "Because if I'd just been a waitress with no degrees, no nonprofit, no neatly documented background, would you still be inviting me up here?" He didn't answer. She continued. "I get it. You're used to being in charge. You think the answer to everything is in your wallet." He opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. "I didn't come here for a job. I came because you asked for my name. And I thought maybe there was a part of you that actually wanted to listen." He looked back at her, really looked. "What do you want from me then?" She shook her head. "I want you to understand that people like me, we exist outside your system. We build things without your grants. We teach kids without your endorsements. We make change without your permission." Jonathan stared at her, a storm gathering behind his eyes, but not anger. Something else. Uncertainty. "I'm not going to work for someone who only sees my skin before my skill, who only listens after public embarrassment, and who offers help only when they want to fix something inside themselves." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small card. On it was the address to Step Free, class times, a phone number. If you want to bring Ethan to a real place where he won't be pitied, prodded, or overcorrected, come by. First class is free. She placed the card on his desk. Jonathan didn't stop her. She turned and walked to the door. Her steps were quiet, but not hesitant. Just before she opened it, she paused. "Power," she said without turning, "isn't how much you can offer. It's what you do when someone says no to you and you accept it." Then she left. Because real power doesn't come from the money in your hand. It comes from the dignity you refuse to sell. The sun hung low over the south side of Chicago, casting long shadows across worn sidewalks and weathered brick. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood that showed up in real estate brochures or promotional campaigns, but it was alive with voices, with color, with possibility. Jonathan Carrington's black Bentley was parked on a narrow side street, sandwiched awkwardly between a rusted minivan and a faded ice cream truck that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. Inside the car, Ethan stared out the window, his small hand pressed to the glass. Across the street stood a modest red brick community center. The windows were clean but old, the front steps chipped but swept. A colorful mural stretched across the side wall. Children of different races with walkers' braces and wheelchairs were painted mid-motion, some spinning, some jumping, some just reaching. In bold letters above the door, "Step Free." Jonathan sat in the driver's seat, both hands on the steering wheel. He hadn't spoken since they left their penthouse. Ethan looked at him. Dad Jonathan didn't turn. His eyes were locked on the building. "You sure you want to do this?" Ethan nodded. "She said I could come." Jonathan finally looked over. "I remember." He got out first, adjusting the sleeves of his sweater, a rare choice for him, less formal than usual, but it still looked expensive. He circled the car, opened Ethan's door, and helped lower the wheelchair ramp. Ethan rolled out excited. The front door of the center opened before they reached it. Aisha stood there wearing dark jeans and a step-free t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup, no apron, no mask, just Aisha. She gave Ethan a smile. Right on time. The boy's face lit up. "Hi, Miss Blake." Aisha nodded. "You can just call me Aisha here." Ethan grinned. Jonathan stood beside them, surveying the building like he expected it to collapse at any moment. Aisha noticed. "It's not much," she said calmly, "but what happens inside matters more than how it looks outside." He gave a tight nod but said nothing. Inside, the space opened up into a large studio room with a polished wooden floor, high ceilings, and soft lighting. There were mirrors on two walls, a set of speakers in one corner, and a row of colorful mats stacked near the door. But what drew Jonathan's attention most were the kids. There were about a dozen of them, ranging from 6 to 12 years old. Some used crutches, one had a prosthetic leg, 2 were in wheelchairs. But none of them looked uncomfortable. None of them looked like patients. They looked like kids, moving freely, spinning, crawling, swaying. Some danced solo, some in pairs, but all were smiling, focused not on perfection, but on exploration. In one corner, a girl in a hot pink wheelchair twirled in tight practice circles. A boy with braces on both legs made up a clumsy but determined stepping rhythm, counting softly to himself. Jonathan blinked. It was chaos. Beautiful, disorganized, unpredictable chaos. He leaned toward Aisha. Is there a plan here? A routine?" Aisha smiled gently. "There's a structure, but it's not what you're used to." She turned to Ethan. "Want to join?" The boy hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Aisha pushed his chair toward the open space and knelt beside him. "Here you decide what you want to try first. We don't tell you what to do. You tell us what you feel like doing." Ethan looked confused. "What if I don't know? Then you try something and see how it feels." He thought for a moment. "Can I start by just moving in my chair?" "Absolutely." She gave him a small push into the center of the room and let go. A few of the other kids noticed and waved. One boy rolled over and bumped his chair wheels against Ethan's in a mock high five. Ethan laughed. Jonathan stood at the edge of the room, unsure of what to do with his hands, his face, or his breath. Aisha returned to his side. He watched his son smile genuinely freely. "You're not correcting him," Jonathan said quietly. "Nope, but his posture's off. His shoulders, not the point." Jonathan frowned. "I'm paying therapists thousands of dollars to improve his balance." "And what has that done for his confidence?" she asked. He didn't answer. "Look," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't a rehab facility. This isn't about fixing. This is about expression." He crossed his arms. "I don't want to indulge him. I want to help him walk again." Aisha's tone stayed steady. "And that's why you've spent the last 2 years watching him retreat further inside himself." He turned to her sharply. "Excuse me." She didn't flinch. "You've surrounded him with experts who talk about him instead of with him. people who measure progress in data points and charts. But Ethan doesn't need a system that tells him what he can't do. He needs a space that lets him discover what he can. Jonathan was silent. Across the room, Ethan was now wheeling in loose circles with the girl in pink. They were laughing, giddy. No one was coaching. No one was correcting. Just movement. Just joy. Aisha leaned against the wall beside him. Kids don't need to be forced forward. They need to be invited. Jonathan's voice dropped. You think I've done it all wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. I think you've done what most people in your position do. You've tried to solve a problem with control, but Ethan's not a problem. He's a person. And people don't heal on command. He didn't respond. A younger woman with a clipboard walked over and quietly handed Aisha a schedule. She nodded in thanks and turned back to him. You're welcome to stay. Watch. Ask questions. Or you can leave and come back in an hour. Either way, he'll be fine. Jonathan looked down at his shoes, then back at his son. I'll stay. Aisha smiled faintly. Good choice. He moved to a chair in the corner and sat down slowly. The other parents were there too. Mothers, grandmothers, a father in a work uniform, a teenage sibling helping his little brother tie a shoelace. They weren't judging. They were just present. Jonathan realized how foreign that felt. No judgment, no competition, no performance. Just presence. Ethan caught his father's eye from across the room and gave a little wave. Jonathan lifted his hand in return, unsure why his chest suddenly felt tight. He looked around the space again. No marble floors, no glass walls, but more progress happening in 15 minutes than he'd seen in 15 months. And all without a single order being given, because here kids weren't led by rules, they were led by choice. And when given the space to choose, they didn't just follow, they discovered. The soft beat of music pulsed gently through the open space of the step-free studio. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to command. It simply moved in the background like a quiet invitation to try. Jonathan Carrington sat against the far wall, arms folded, watching his son blend into a group of children, spinning and stepping in their own awkward but joyful ways. There were no therapists directing, no timers, no clipboards, just motion and laughter. He'd been watching Ethan for almost 20 minutes now, and something was different. The boy's shoulders weren't tense. His eyes weren't darting toward adults for approval. He wasn't waiting to be told how to move. He was just moving. Aisha stood nearby, guiding with her presence more than her words. When a child stumbled, she didn't rush to fix it. When one paused, she let the silence fill in. She wasn't leading them. She was letting them lead themselves. Jonathan found that unsettling and unfamiliar. He shifted in his chair as Ethan slowed to a stop near the center of the room. The kids around him danced in their own patterns, but Ethan stayed still, his eyes fixed on the floor. Jonathan sat forward slightly. Ethan reached down, grasped the strap of the brace on his left leg, and unfastened it. Jonathan stood up immediately. Ethan, his voice was loud, cutting through the room. Several heads turned. The music didn't stop, but the motion in the room slowed. Aisha moved quickly to Jonathan, placing a gentle but firm hand on his arm. Let him choose, she said quietly. Jonathan looked at her eyes wide. He's not ready. He could fall. Aisha didn't blink. Maybe, but he wants to try. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. Every part of his body screamed to intervene, to stop it, to fix it before it broke. But he stayed still. Ethan unfastened the last strap. The brace slid off with a light clunk onto the mat beside him. He took a breath. His hands clenched and unclenched. He looked up and saw Aisha watching him, not with pressure, but with belief. And then he stepped. One shaky, uneven motion. His right leg wobbled. His balance shifted. For a second, Jonathan's breath caught. But Ethan didn't fall. His left leg lifted slightly less than an inch and touched forward. A full step. Not a graceful one. Not textbook. But it was his. The room went silent. No one clapped, no one cheered yet. It was too delicate of a moment. Ethan stood frozen, wide-eyed, blinking rapidly, as if unsure it had actually happened. Then a girl in a wheelchair next to him said softly, "That was awesome." And that broke it. The kids erupted into claps and cheers. A few instructors smiled. One boy gave Ethan a clumsy fist bump. Jonathan remained standing, unmoving. His throat felt tight. He blinked once, then again faster. His eyes began to sting. He sat down slowly. Aisha came to sit next to him, but didn't speak. After a long silence, Jonathan whispered, "I was his brace." Aisha looked at him. He continued, voice low. All this time I thought I was helping him walk, but I was just making sure he couldn't fall. And maybe that's why he couldn't move forward." Aisha nodded, her voice soft. "There's a difference between protecting and preventing." Jonathan didn't respond. He just kept watching Ethan, who was now standing taller, holding the brace in his hands like a trophy. Across the room, Zoe entered quietly, holding a folder. She nodded to Aisha and motioned toward the office. Aisha stood up. Before leaving, she said to Jonathan, "We're not just helping kids walk, we're helping them trust themselves. And sometimes that means stepping back, even when it scares you." Jonathan sat in silence. Ethan turned and met his father's eyes. For the first time in years, Jonathan didn't see fragility. He saw strength, uncoached, unprompted, unfiltered, just strength. One step. That was all it took to change everything. The community center was unusually full that morning. Parents, staff, volunteers, and a few reporters stood packed into the main activity room, the usual sound of children's movement replaced by the low hum of conversation and the occasional click of a camera shutter. A large folding table near the front was draped in a simple white cloth. On it sat a few bottles of water, some paperwork, and a hastily made, step-free press briefing sign written in black marker on poster board. No one had expected this kind of attention, certainly not Aisha. She stood just off to the side, arms crossed lightly in front of her, trying to focus on her breathing. She was dressed in a simple olive green blouse and jeans. Her name tag read Program Director, though it was handwritten and slightly crooked. She wasn't used to the attention. Zoe stood beside her, arms crossed tightly, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Why is the Tribune here?" she whispered. "They said they were in the area." Aisha replied, not looking away from the podium. "That's code for we heard a billionaire might show up." Aisha gave a faint, tired smile. The chatter grew louder. All heads turned as the doors opened and Jonathan Carrington entered, not with bodyguards or press reps. No suit, just a navy sweater, slacks, and a look of quiet intent. He walked slowly to the front of the room and stood at the podium. The room hushed, cameras raised, recorders clicked on. He took a deep breath. "Good morning." His voice was even, but there was a slight rasp, like he'd rehearsed this and still wasn't sure how it would land. "I know many of you have questions about why I'm here, and to be honest, I'm still asking myself the same thing." A soft laugh rippled across the crowd, easing the tension. Jonathan continued, "I came to Step Free a few weeks ago as a father. Not a donor, not a CEO, just a father who had run out of ideas. My son Ethan has spent 2 years in recovery after an accident that changed everything about how he moves and how he sees himself." He paused, eyes scanning the room. "What I saw here wasn't like anything I had seen before. There were no lectures, no measurements, just kids moving however they could, not being corrected, just being seen." Aisha swallowed hard. Jonathan looked toward her briefly, just long enough to acknowledge her, but not long enough to draw attention. "And yesterday, I watched my son take a step without anyone telling him how, when, or why. He just did it." Another pause. This place gave him something no hospital, no specialist, no therapy program could. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Unfolding it slowly, he looked out at the reporters. "The Carrington Foundation is committing full funding to Step Free for the next 5 years. This includes a new facility to expand operations, increase capacity, and bring this model to other cities." The room stirred. Pens scribbled, keyboards tapped, cameras clicked rapidly. Jonathan raised a hand to quiet the reactions. "But this funding comes with one condition." He glanced at Aisha again, this time longer, firmer. "There will be no oversight committee. No corporate board, no foundation representative sitting in the corner with a clipboard. The program stays in the hands of the person who built it." He turned toward her directly now. "Aisha Blake has full authority, operational, financial, and strategic. The foundation will provide resources. She'll decide how to use them. Period." A collective stillness fell across the room. Zoe's jaw dropped slightly. She turned toward Aisha, whose face was still and unreadable, but her eyes were glassy. Jonathan stepped back from the podium. Reporters launched into a flurry of questions. "What changed your mind about this place? Why give full control to someone without a formal title? Is this about PR?" Jonathan lifted a hand again. "I came here thinking I had answers. I was wrong. And when you realize you've been wrong, the right thing to do is stop talking and start listening." Aisha felt a lump rise in her throat. He looked at her one last time. "You said power isn't what you can offer. It's what you do when someone says no." He nodded. "I'm finally learning what that means." Then he stepped back, turned, and sat in the row with the parents next to a woman helping her son adjust a leg brace. He didn't return to the front. He didn't wait to be thanked. He simply sat down. Aisha walked slowly toward the podium. She wasn't used to microphones. She didn't have a speech. She placed her palms flat on the surface and took a breath. I'm not a foundation executive. I'm not a doctor. I don't have a fancy title. She looked out across the crowd at the parents who had trusted her, the children behind the reporters who peeked around corners, and Jonathan watching quietly. I'm just someone who saw too many kids being told who they couldn't be, so I created a place where they get to decide that for themselves. She paused, voice tightening. I didn't build Step Free alone, and I didn't build it with money. I built it with trust. And today, someone showed me that trust works both ways. Her eyes flicked back to Jonathan. Thank you. Not for the check, but for stepping back and letting us lead. There was no applause right away, just a heavy silence. Then slowly the crowd stood, not for her speech, for what it meant. That power had finally changed hands and stayed there. Because real empowerment isn't about lifting someone up so you can control them from above. It's about stepping out of the way and watching them rise without you. The conference room on the 38th floor of Carrington Tower was quiet, except for the soft shuffle of papers and the subtle click of a pen in Jonathan's hand. Around the long glass table, board members discussed projections, regional developments, and press coverage. But Jonathan barely spoke. He sat at the far end reading a report, one not from his foundation, nor from any division of Carrington Properties. It was a bound dossier printed in simple typeface with no branding on the cover. Just a title, Step Free Year 1 Impact Report. It wasn't thick, but every page held more meaning than most of the quarterly updates he'd received all month. Charts showed not just attendance, but mobility progression. Testimonials from parents, drawings from children. There was a hand-scrawled note from Ethan at the back of the book. I can stand longer now. And I like standing, but I still like moving more. Jonathan closed the folder slowly. He stared at the table's surface for a long moment, then looked up at the group. I'll review these updates later, he said simply. And with that, he stood, nodded once, and left the room. No one stopped him. 2 weeks later, Aisha stood on stage at a national pediatric rehabilitation conference in Washington, D.C. She wasn't used to podiums. Not like this. The ballroom was large, filled with doctors, therapists, researchers, policymakers, most of them older, most of them white. She wore a deep blue dress and a silver pin that read Step Free. Her name had just been announced, Aisha Blake, recipient of the National Award for Innovation in Movement Therapy. As she approached the microphone, the audience clapped politely, professionally. She didn't give a rehearsed speech. She just spoke like she always did, clearly, simply, from the center of truth. I'm not a scientist, she said. I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not even someone with a finished graduate degree. A pause. I'm a woman who saw what happened when no one let kids move in their own way, so I built a space where they could. She glanced across the audience. Toward the back, Jonathan sat alone. No entourage, no attention drawn to himself. And what I've learned is simple, she continued. Children do not grow when you carry them. They grow when you give them room to try and fail and try again. We don't need better systems. We need more patience, less control, more listening. The applause that followed was no longer polite. It was real. Later that evening after the event, Jonathan approached her quietly in the hotel lobby. Aisha was sipping coffee by herself, reading a local article someone had handed her community-based program expands to 3 cities after award recognition. She didn't look up when he sat down. For a moment they sat in silence. Jonathan finally spoke. You haven't returned my calls. She turned the page without answering. He cleared his throat. I know I've done a lot, helped expand the program, pushed the foundation, connected resources. Aisha looked up, eyes calm but unreadable. He held her gaze. I thought maybe that counted for something. She set the paper down slowly. It does, she said. It counted for a lot. He waited, but it's not an apology. The words hit harder than he expected. I thought it would be, he admitted. All of it, the funding, the public support, stepping back. I thought those things meant I was sorry. She leaned forward slightly. They mean you care. They mean you're trying to make things better. And I respect that. A beat. But they're not the same as saying you were wrong. And meaning it. Jonathan looked away. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was just quiet. Aisha's voice softened. You want to know why I never said thank you for the donation? He nodded. Because it wasn't a gift, she said. It was a correction. He blinked. And I didn't need a gift. I needed to be heard. They sat in silence for another moment, then Jonathan finally nodded. Fair. His voice was low. Aisha stood up, gathered her folder, and slipped the article into her bag. Jonathan, she said, before walking away, the work you've done, it matters. But if you really want to change something, start with the words you've been afraid to say. Then she left. And for the first time in a long, long while, Jonathan didn't try to follow. He didn't argue. He just sat there alone in a busy hotel lobby, realizing that for all his wealth, for all his power, he had still never said the one thing that might matter most. I'm sorry. Not in a press release, not through a donation, not by stepping aside, just plainly, as a man who was wrong. And until he did, forgiveness would stay just out of reach. Not because she was unkind, but because she understood something he was still learning. You don't earn forgiveness with what you give. You earn it by what you're willing to admit. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the new step-free rehabilitation center. It wasn't built like a hospital. It didn't look like a traditional school. It looked like a place where movement was welcome, even if it was awkward, slow, or unfinished. The main hall, freshly painted in warm yellows and soft grays, had been transformed into a celebration space. Folding chairs lined the perimeter, filled with parents, community leaders, therapists, and foundation members. Banners hung from the ceiling, hand-drawn by the children themselves. Your pace, your power, every step counts. And a large one in bold marker, welcome to our new home. In the center of the room, 4 children stood in a semicircle. Among them, Ethan Carrington. He was wearing a navy button-up shirt tucked into tan slacks. On his left leg was a thin, lightweight support brace. The right leg, once bound in metal, was now free. His steps were still cautious, but he stood straight eyes, scanning the audience with something that hadn't been there a year ago. Confidence. A beat of music began to play. A soft, playful rhythm. Ethan looked to his friends, 3 other kids, each with different mobility needs. One girl moved her upper body more than her legs. A boy with a prosthetic lower limb bounced in place. Another held a crutch in one hand, but smiled wide. They began their routine. Slow, synchronized motions. No choreography built for applause. Just gestures they'd created together. A hand raise, a body turn, a full step forward. The audience was still, watching. Not like spectators, but like witnesses to something intimate. Jonathan Carrington stood near the back wall, no microphone in sight. He wore no suit, just a light gray sweater and dark slacks. His arms were by his side, hands lightly folded. His jaw was set, but his eyes tracked every move his son made. He didn't speak. He didn't try to take the moment. He just watched. Near the front, Aisha stood beside Zoe, both wearing matching step-free shirts under formal blazers. Their shoulders were slightly pressed together, silent support passing between them. As the music faded, Ethan and the others completed their routine with a final pose, arms extended to the side, heads held high. There was no explosion of clapping, just a quiet beat of breath, and then applause. Rising genuine, the kind that came not from performance, but from recognition. The children beamed. Ethan turned toward the audience and found his father. Jonathan smiled, then gave a slow, small nod. Ethan's grin widened. A few reporters moved in closer, now that the performance was over. Microphones raised, questions began flying. Aisha was answering one about the center's expansion when a journalist near Jonathan turned to him. Mr. Carrington, she asked, you've invested millions into Step Free and helped make this facility a reality. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from this journey? Jonathan paused. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. He looked past the reporter, past the crowd, and locked eyes with his son, who had walked farther in the past year than Jonathan had imagined possible. Then he spoke. Clear, slow, no rehearsed polish. That the person who leads isn't always the one walking in front. The room quieted. He continued, sometimes leadership means stepping back, watching, learning, and following someone else when they show you a better way forward. He looked at Aisha now. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. But her eyes held something softer, something that said, you finally said it. The reporter lowered her microphone, visibly moved. A few parents wiped at their eyes. One therapist clapped with one hand pressed to her chest. The celebration resumed cake photos, interviews. But Jonathan didn't rejoin the center of attention. He stayed at the edge of the room. A man who had built empires by controlling every step, now finally understanding the beauty of letting someone else lead. Later, as the event wrapped up, Jonathan and Aisha met briefly near the staff entrance. No cameras, no crowd. He spoke first. "Thank you." For what Aisha asked. For not letting me buy my way out of learning what I needed to. She gave a small smile. "You did the hard part. You listened." A long silence passed. Then Jonathan added quietly, "And I'm sorry for not saying it sooner." Aisha nodded. "Now it means something." He turned to leave, but before he did, he asked, "Do you think I'm too late to be the kind of father he needs?" She shook her head. "No, because you're just in time to be the kind of father he'll remember." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Ethan now runs warm-up circles at Step Free twice a week. The center expanded to 3 cities in the first year. Each location is run by a different local team, but they all follow one shared principle: movement should never be dictated. It should be discovered. Aisha declined offers from private medical firms, saying healing doesn't come from ownership. Zoe still handles operations and still wears her hijab like a crown of purpose. Jonathan now shows up without notice, not as a donor, but as a father who watches from the side and occasionally volunteers to wipe mats or adjust speakers. He no longer tries to lead the room. He's busy learning how to follow. And that is exactly the legacy Ethan gave him. The story of Ethan, Aisha, and Jonathan wasn't just about steps or dance or even healing. It was about trust, about knowing when to guide and when to step back, about learning that real strength doesn't always come from standing tall, but from being brave enough to let others rise. It reminded us that love isn't control, that leadership isn't loud, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for our children, for each other, is simply to listen. And now, we'd love to hear from you. Has there ever been a moment in your life when stepping back allowed someone else to grow? Or a time when someone finally gave you the space to find your own path? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched something in your heart, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today, and subscribing to our channel. Together we can keep telling stories that heal, uplift, and remind us what really matters. Thank you for watching, and thank you for staying.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.